and welcome back to Stranger Than Fiction. I know it's been maybe almost 2 weeks now since I've posted a video, so I'm sorry about that. I got caught up with stuff. Actually, was trying to finish up some books to review. Didn't have a lot of book haul stuff yet to even do a video there. Got caught up in some gaming, staying up late, and which caused me to either be busy for videos or cutting into some of my before bed reading time. I've been talking about it a while since I've had the show, but I finally finished The Best of Barry and Malzberg. Pretty good size chunk of short stories. This is my first experience reading Malzberg, and this was I know he's it's kind of a funny coincidence, as he's been talked about a bit on YouTube for, the niche science fiction and fantasy YouTube, and even on Whatnot. There's several YouTubers that like him, several people on there that were pushing his praises, and he unfortunately just passed away earlier this year. So whenever someone passes, it usually brings a little bit of attention to their life and their legacy. But that being said, I did not pick to read this book because of that. This was a random RNG selection from my inventory. So cool coincidence. And before we get going a little bit more on it, I will admit I am not much of a short story reader. I've struggled with it in the past to really generate a lot of interest. I typically like longer, more involved. Doesn't necessarily have to have world building per se, but usually really suck me into that narrative and that characters interaction. Maybe something that's probably a little more alongside of fantasy, epic fantasy, or space opera. But I do like hard sci-fi too. So I don't want it to seem like I don't. I think it's just more of a short stories issue with me. So I'm trying to enjoy short stories more. That being said, I don't think they're ever going to be like my favorite thing. I know people who really like short stories like those short bursts of reading. They don't have to commit to a long thing. They don't have to remember a bunch of complex plots and characters. And I get that. So I think some short story reading is a good palate cleanser in a way between longer series, if you will, or it's really good. I've been listening to the Red Rising series, so the Red Rising experience versus Best of Barry and Malzberg can't get hardly any different while still being in the same rough genre. Definitely different subgenres, but so a little bit about the book. This was published in early 1976. I think Malzberg put it together in 75. He mentions it in there. It's 398 pages of short. It's a thick boy. It's a lot of stuff in here. And there are 38 stories. So I struggled with this at times, especially early on in the beginning. So I'll put this down. I even made a little note card here of some stuff to follow, just because I read it over such a period. And there's just so many short stories, so many things to remember, like which title they are versus what the content was. But some definite things I can talk about first are some themes. So Malzberg and maybe it's a sign of the times. It's still a momentous occasion or history event for now, but JFK assassination. Malzberg has several stories that are about it. Maybe at least two or three. I say several, two or three. And then a few others that mention it. And so he seemed to be, and he even says he's fairly obsessed with that. Actually, back up 1 second again before I go into themes. In front of each story, Malzberg did a little introduction. And that's one of my favorite parts of this book. We're reading his introductions. He didn't spoil stories or anything by any means. But he did delve into some of what he was thinking, some of his themes, some of the history about it, some things about some other writers in the industry, which I found fairly fascinating and got to see his perspective. Plum God, who's in my Discord and a seller on Whatnot, and he's an avid Malzberg fan. He even killed him, the rumor has it. But it's an inside joke. Anyway, he made me lose my train of thought, but he really, likes what he puts forward. How he's a humble writer. He was frustrated with the industry. Explain all those things. But then when I read some of these introductions, Malzberg is very he thinks fairly highly of himself, and I wouldn't say in a bragging way, more in a I am a good literary writer and I just have to do science fiction because that's what I can, get printed and make money. And a lot of these writers suck, and there's a few ones that are good, and I'm pretty good, and I'm one of those. And he sprinkles that in there, and he's not bragging. He's just very matter of fact. This is where he thinks it ranks, right? Which I respect. So themes, JFK, that's a big one. Another one, he likes to use these monolithic or terms for these bureaucracies or entities like the city, and it'll be capitalized city, the institute, the bureau, the network, the outside, all these, and nowhere, of course, in the short stories does he explain what these things are. He's just based on it being capitalized as being this government or organization entity. You're expected to just kind of know with that loaded term what it kind of represents. So, which sometimes is easier than not. I think some of his stories are a little harder to read, a little harder to follow. And then I think, hey, is it over my head? I don't think so. Sometimes actually I think I want to look further into it, and then what he's actually getting there is just in plain sight. What the thing he's alluding to or symbolizing or whatever. And so sometimes I think I'm trying to look too far into it when it's just clear on paper. So another one that's very evident in his is despair, his frustration coming out, and then that also sexual repression. For those who may want to read this book, be warned, there are a few very violent sexual stories, more so in the first half of the stories, and a couple of them being like raping of his father or his mother and violently doing so, but not him, but like a character in, whatever. So I'm not going to dig too far into that. Those are a little bit more, but he tries to be transgressive. He tries to make things almost to the ridiculous level to drive home a point. But when you read it on paper, as the words are written, some of it's a little rough. So he has that despair, that frustration with society, with writing. He has satires of writing, one of them being a story I kind of like. And I'll get to my favorite stories here in a little bit. So directly or indirectly referencing the industry in some of his writing. But you can just see he's a frustrated person with the world, with how things operate. Another theme is the medical industry and insurance and stuff. So I think Malzberg would feel right at home nowadays with, there's still a lot of controversy and differing opinions on how the medical industry, especially here in the U.S., is, and how insurance and all that works. And he has stories that, and again, not each story is a single theme distilled, right? It's some of these themes are together in some stories and they're not in some stories and mixed in, but the despair and frustration is in a lot of them, I'd say. He also likes, he seemed very interested in schizophrenia, and actually not seems, in one of his introductions, he even, clarifies that that's an area of, interest for him. And I think, he has 1970s and 60s, opinions, I would say maybe opinions, but understanding of schizophrenia, where I think now in modern days, more research has been done, and maybe the stories wouldn't read quite the same. So some of those feel a little dated. Some of his science, he's definitely not hard science person. I would say, physics or anything like that. It's more so story set. He's more again a literary fiction writer that writes stories in the science fiction realm to open up more possibilities for comparisons, and that's a lot of what fantasy and sci-fi, some of their strengths that allow. Yeah, and the sexual repression. He likes to write a lot about homosexuality. A lot of his main characters are gay, which again, for nowadays, that seems very common. In the 60s and 70s, I'm sure this was fairly controversial, and definitely not something, that was typical amongst writers. So he does venture out a bit with that and some of his depictions there. He also likes to write a lot about Christianity. He's Jewish, and he explains he's only written a couple Jewish stories, but he likes to write more of the stories that deal with the Christianity aspect of it. A lot of the Apocalypse and Judgment Day. There's a few stories around those. Actually, one of those, a couple of those I quite liked, and I'm not a religious person, so a lot of religious science fiction or religious fantasy that's real heavy on it. Maybe if it's a made up one in that world and how it, more of a critique and, or maybe I say critique, but a discussion or how religion can influence people and societies, good and bad, or whatever, or however you want to say it. I like those, but when it's more like hard referencing specific things from like the Bible or any of the other religious texts from other religions, or things like that, I'm not as well versed in a lot of those, despite them pervading a lot of our and influencing a lot of our other stories and things in life, just that we maybe not even aware of. I don't have that level of knowledge of the source material for some of that story to impact me as maybe it would others who were. And I think even, again, nowadays, as opposed to 50 years ago when this book was written almost, I think as a whole, we're a little more secular. We're back in the 60s and 70s. People were much more, for the most part, percentage-wise, maybe more religious overall. So those are kind of a lot of his themes. I'm sure I missed some. I'm sure many, there's a lot of material in here. It's a lot. 400 pages of short stories, and how condensed short stories are. It's just so much to cover. And I'm trying not to make this an overly long review. So some of my favorite stories, and I even missed one. I just brought it up, but I forgot about. One of my favorite ones is near the end, and I'd have to look up the name, but it's one of the Christian ones, where a man's father-in-law keeps prophesizing, it's Judgment Day, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. He's kind of crazy, and then one morning he wakes up and tells the main character and his wife, Judgment Day happened. I saw it on TV. Let's go in the bunker, right? And so some of this also, I think, with the bunkers and the bombs, this nuclear war, Judgment Day happened. Some of that Cold War scare too. You could see some that influences writing. It influenced so much of our media from the 50s through 80s, as the Cold War stuff, especially in the 80s films and things. You see a lot, but so they go in this bunker, and in the bunker they find this alien who then throw some things. I don't want to spoil any of these stories. It's a 50-year book, but I like the premise of, did it really happen, or is he saying it because he wants it to happen? But if it's toxic, radiation outside, how can you go and verify and check? So that's some of the themes in that one. I'm not going to say any more, but you kind of get the gist. But I like that situation that came into play there. It was pretty interesting. A couple of the biggest one in the book was Man in the Pocket, which is it's the source material for The Man Inside. And this is, by far the longest short story. I'd almost could argue it'd be a novella. And then they ended up turning it into a novel of The Man Inside. So it's about these people who go into the Institute or the Bureau. It's one of those things. And they get trained to get really, really small. And they can go and insert into people's bodies. And they even say, oh, you don't want to hear how we do it, and I won't tell you in the story. So I'm not as me as the main character says that to the reader. And they go and they try to repair cancer out of these people's bodies as a miniature person. So it was interesting. I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say repetitive, but I think he could have got what he got across in that one with even less pages. And then they even made it longer with the book. So I don't know how much I enjoyed The Men Inside. It's all right. It's pretty good. And then the other is that I know he Closed Sicilian, which is Tactics of Conquest source material. I quite like that one. It's a chess story of these two, I think it's a person and an alien even playing chess against each other for like the fate of some wars or world. I could be wrong there. It's been a few weeks since I read this one, but the whole inner thought process and the back and forth and the strategy, I quite liked it. People who aren't chess fans, and I'm not a huge chess fan. I grew up playing it as a kid, and I know it. And it's not just about that. It's got other things it, symbolizes. But that was an easy read. I kind of went through that one, page turned, and no, that was good. I could see myself enjoying the Tactics of Conquest book. Bearing Witness is another religious one, surprisingly enough, that it's very short. It's like only 3 or 4 pages, and it's about this guy who's not even religious, and something about judgment coming, and then who does he end up being? This one's so short that I don't even want to spoil it, but it was a good one. I liked it. Some Judgment Day, Christ is risen themes, but the way it's done is interesting. Kind of in a, some of these feel like Twilight Zone stories in a way, but not as like, haha, gotcha, but more of a, oh, this little funny ending kind of thing at the end. Um, Making It Through was another one I really enjoyed. And the premise, it's again, part of his schizophrenia is going crazy, psychological stuff he wrote about. Um, but it's a small crew, and they're traveling to meet some alien race that they already kind of know about it, they interacted with, and there's some thoughts that alien race can affect. They're not very warlike, and they can't fight really, but the way they operate is they can uh, influence people's thoughts and things, or at least that's what humanity thinks that it can do. And so I think this captain, maybe one or the other, wants to kill them, and then the main character is the first mate or whatever, and he doesn't, or it could be flip flopped. I can't remember which. And then the whole time, the main character is thinking the captain's gone crazy, and the aliens have made him crazy, and they want to do this. And if they, and then and then it comes to find out the captain thinks he's sane, and he thinks the first mate, the main character, has gone crazy. And so they're both at each other on what they should do, and who's really the one is are the aliens manipulating to be crazy, to either attack them and give them justification, or not attack them and then they preserve themselves, right? And or are they both just making it up and paranoid and thinking each other one's the crazy one, and the aliens don't even do any of that at all, right? So that's kind of the premise of the story. He doesn't give you a lot of resolutions in his stories, more very open-ended. So if people want everything spelled out for you in your stories and your endings, you probably won't like this book. This is a lot of what ifs, and I'm going to show you this tonight. It's not so much about the ending, it's about the what if, or the conundrum, or the whatever it is, right? So I enjoyed that one. I thought that was a pretty cool, interesting take on psychology and studying that. Another theme I forgot about, this brings it up to me. A lot of the science fiction that Malzberg likes to put in his stories are like machines or AI, or people who use like, things you hook up to your brain and you simulate experiences. So a lot of the sexual repression ones are people, doing these taboo sexual fantasies, and it's like they, maybe like they would see something in like older, psych wards and things where they would do all the therapies, and you kind of see it in Clockwork Orange at the end. That kind of stuff, right? The hooking them up and letting them do these simulations and acting out, and then them getting observed if they can be good people or not, or maybe doing these acting out your sexual repressions and sexual violence in these simulations or these visions can cure you or do whatever. So there's many stories in this book that has situations like that where the characters is seeing things and how they respond, and getting that repression out, or frustration, or the curing. Or so I think it's some of it a commentary on some of the psychological psych ward type of medical care, and again falls into the medical care stuff. So a lot of his themes kind of go together in some ways, or borrow from each other. And then Trial of the Blood was my favorite up into the middle until I read the next one. And this is a very different one from all the other stories. It's him writing as Dracula, from the perspective of Dracula and Dracula's journal, and getting that side of it. So it's really well done. Malzberg did a great job. That was a good one. So I recommend checking that one out. My favorite of all of them is called Network. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic story. Sits very well in like a 70s, 80s post-apocalyptic B-movie kind of thing, in a way. So these two young, and they're homosexual partners at this school or whatever it seems like, the network, or no, they go into the network. I don't remember. Maybe the school's the institute and the city's the network. It's something like that. But they're there, they're bored, and what are they? So their thing to go out and get some thrills and risk themselves is to go out into this city, urban decayed city, and I think that's a lot of his theme is about urban decay and how we, like New York City from the 60s and 70s and how rough it was getting into the 80s. And so they go out kind of thrill seeking out in the city with these poor people who live on their own, or out in the middle, it's not a wasteland, but a dystopian futuristic city that's kind of fallen apart with this and run by gangs and things like that. So and they get the thrills off by first, shooting and attacking this family that's like begging them for help. Sort of, it's that bad, but also not quite that bad. They're not just like gunning them down. They come to the car. Were they really trying to heist them and trick them or that? And then they kind of have a response and a freak out to that, and they try to travel this other area and basically kind of sort of get captured in a way, and you find out some things and some information, but he actually does a really good job of kind of, I wouldn't say world building, but building that scene, building the atmosphere and the environment. And I've always been a sucker for post-apocalyptic stuff and urban decay and all that. So that one kind of, maybe if it's not the best story, it kind of aligns with me a little more and the things I like. So I found that one to be quite good, and I enjoyed it. Some of these short stories you read and you're like, oh, when's this going to be done? How many pages is this one? Oh, okay. I'll slug through it. And some of the ones I'm reading are like, man, I kind of wish this was like a bigger story. I wish this was a full novel that could have really explored this world and things. So I think it's a sign of good short story when you're hoping it to be more. And another one that's kind of cool, a delightful comedic premise, and it's definitely be a comedy, and it's not so much science fiction at all. It's kind of like a diary like or recording of this back and forth between a editor from maybe a science fiction magazine company, or press or whatever, and some messages back and forth on some stories that he wants Malzberg to write, and then Malzberg is like kind of does what the guy's asking but turns it on its head and so, okay, so you want me to write this story? How about I do this, 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 and this? And the guy's like, no, I don't want that at all. Just do what I'm telling you. And he's like, oh, okay, well, how about this? But then this, and this happens. And it's like these ridiculous premises. But reading some of the stories, I can see this is probably close to a true, actual, capturing events with maybe some exaggeration thrown in, but. And then it ends up with his wife responding, sorry, he's doing this, he's writing this book for you. And so this back and forth, I found it quite amusing and kind of paints the picture of how it's probably not that far from the truth with him. And I know he had some contentious relationships with some of the editors, like Campbell's one of them, I believe, who didn't really care for him too much. Even though he does respect him, he wrote in his book. And then there's another one I wrote down, Opening Fire. And I'm trying to remember. Let me see which one that is. I could talk. It's the last of my favorites. It's on page 299. What is this one about? Oh yes, okay. This one's good. So this would also be applicable to modern times. And it's kind of similar to the aliens making you go crazy, wanted away. But there's this alien race, and they're trying to integrate with humanity, and they seem to be friendly, but they're not sure. But then there's a percentage of people who just hate them, and so they're going out into this diplomatic mission, and like very xenophobic, just hates them because they're aliens. And the main character is one of those people, and they said that he's being brought aboard because they want all of humanity represented, even the ones that hate the aliens, to kind of sniff out if they're being true or not. And maybe and he writes, is hating the aliens a evolutionary thing? Is this tribalism and an evolutionary reaction to outsiders, that those who were trusting of outsiders got killed, right? And those who were not trusting of outsiders are alive and then still alive today. So that's kind of the thought some of them are saying in there, is that, okay, so we need to trust this person's instincts, because xenophobia, this tribalism is you know, survived evolution because they were, you know, more wary. So, you know, very similar to some of the thoughts of domesticating of animals, right? You domesticate and breed the ones that are friendly to humans, and now you have a domesticated, you know, cats, dogs, cattle, things like that. So it's kind of along those lines. And then they finally have this meeting up with the aliens, and I guess I'll spoil this one since it's the end, and a lot of you don't watch these videos till the end anyway. So, um, and if you don't want to hear it, just skip ahead like 20, 30 seconds. But at the end, he's finally meeting with the captain of the ship, and he's like, okay, we've done all this. You've seen these negotiations. Do you still hate these aliens? And he's like, yes, I hate these aliens. I want to kill them, blah, blah, blah. And so the aliens are actually hiding. And they're like, see, I told you. You know, they're not going to, you know, if we're doing this the work for us to be together, you need to kill off these people who hate us for no reason. And so it kind of flips it. They didn't bring him to observe the aliens. They brought him for the aliens and the people to show them. And the aliens like, see, I told you so. These people can't be changed, even no matter how nice and honest we are. And so it's assumed they kill the guy. So it turns it on its head. He doesn't necessarily, and I guess maybe he leans a little more in his story, saying, you know, the tribalism's bad, and you know, and so a lot of this, the immigration in the U.S. and things, it's still, you know, so on par or on the nose today with how things, you know, are in these discussions. And it's probably always going to be a lot of wars are fought in the past, you know, with tribalism and identity and things. So nationalities and what have you. And he doesn't necessarily say like one's bad or the other. He probably leans more into that, but he makes arguments for both. And it's not meant to be that so much, but just kind of bring awareness and kind of put a different perspective on it. So I found that one to be a very intriguing story, and kind of to me what short stories are meant to do, right? Meant to do these things. So all in all, those are my favorites. There are some I really didn't care for at all. There are some that are just take it or leave it. These are my favorites. There's probably, you know, I would say it's a fairly even mix between didn't like them, all right, pretty good, and then here are my favorites. And I would say as about as many stories as I just mentioned now. There's that about that many in each of the other sections, at least in my opinion. So not a bad mix. It's a bit long for short stories. Overall book. It took me a while to read it, longer than I'd want to, so I need to catch up with some other reading soon. So that is my review of The Best of Barry and Malzberg. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be doing another video here soon with a new book haul and posting that up as well. So have a great one. Thanks.